Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about some nuts and bolts theology, some very basic and technical stuff, more technical than what we've been talking about before anyway. I want to go into greater detail in defining systematic theology for you, because systematic theology is what concerns us as philosophical or critical thinkers. I'm just assuming that that's the kind of thinker that you are, given that you're watching one of my videos. Now you may recall in one of my other videos that I defined theology as being the answer as opposed to the question. And when we receive an answer from something, it's usually prudent of us as thinkers to examine more carefully where this answer came from. And so we see that theology has three sources. The first of which is Scripture, as in Christian biblical Scripture. It is seen as primary. Ultimately, it has the final say in what Christians say and think. But here's the important thing. Scripture by itself is insufficient. Now this is where I would disagree with a lot of evangelical Bible thumpers out there, and where most liturgically minded Christians would agree with me when I say that Scripture by itself is insufficient, because it's like trying to read a book that's thousands of years old, written in a completely different culture, without really understanding the intricacies of that culture. If we as modern people pick up a 1,000-year-old book with no resources at our disposal and just read it raw, then we're going to be missing a lot of things, a lot of key thoughts and things. And systematic theology means to help us avoid that by providing us with a second source, and this source is tradition. Tradition, broadly defined, is the resources that are at the disposal of the Christian thinker. Christianity has a very long and rich intellectual history. When we look back at all the councils that have been convened, or the thinkers such as Thomas Aquinas or St. Augustine, who have helped define modern thought, we look back at all the creeds and the confessions, we find that we have some pretty invaluable commentary to help us interpret Scripture. Well, wait a minute, I hear some of you thinking. We can use this commentary to help us interpret Scripture, but what is in place to keep this commentary from raging unchecked? What's there to keep it in place, intellectually speaking? Well, I'm so glad you thought of that, astute viewer, because theology has a third source, and that is philosophy. Now, we're using the word philosophy here not to refer to philosophical histories or thinkers implicitly, but we are using it in its actual meaning, which is a love of wisdom. That's what the word philosophy actually means, a love of wisdom. Now, we know that human beings love to learn. Human beings universally make strides towards knowledge, wisdom, and truth. It's just kind of what drives us. We want to learn more about the world around us. And so when we take the general knowledge that human beings have learned from the world around us, we can use that knowledge to help refine what we think of tradition or even of Scripture. It helps to keep what we believe intellectually honest. And that way, it's pretty invaluable as a source of theology. Now, tradition and philosophy are both tertiary to Scripture. Ultimately, the answer that has been given is more important than anything else. But at the same time, it's pretty important that we have tools to help us interpret what the answer means. So, to summarize, Scripture is primary, and tradition and theology are tertiary. Now, all of that having been said, each of the sources of theology concerns itself with a specific field or study. Scripture concerns itself with biblical theology, which is theology that is gleaned from the Scriptures directly. Tradition concerns itself with historical theology, which is theology that you get from having a full and accurate historical perspective. And philosophy concerns itself with philosophical theology, which is perhaps the most human endeavor of the three, because it is the attempt to take everything that we've learned about, anything from the world around us, and apply it to the other two sources to help refine our understanding of them and keep them intellectually honest. Now, as a quick side note, the thought occurs to me that atheists would probably feel most comfortable studying Christian theology if they think of themselves as philosophical theologians, because of the sources, philosophy seems to be the most far removed from the religious baggage that Scripture or tradition might imply in the mind of an atheist. And despite being far removed from this, philosophy is directed towards these other sources in a very academically honest capacity, and I think that's something that atheists would probably appreciate. Correct me if I'm wrong. And so we can see that Christian theology has three sources, and each of these sources has a branch, or a specific study or aspect of theology that it devotes itself to. And when these branches are synthesized together, the end product is systematic theology. Systematic theology means to weave these things together to create a comprehensive whole, a systematic unity that the modern thinker will be able to make sense of. And that being said, systematic theology has 3 tasks, the first of which is to be clear, comprehensive, and descriptive. The second of which is to be critical, on a larger scale and on an individual level. And the third of which is to be constructive, to repair, to remedy. Now, each of these seems pretty self-explanatory, so I won't go into too much detail about each of these tasks, but the thing to take away from all this is that systematic theology is a web of convictions that draws lines of connections between each of these very different sources and their branches. Now, when people discuss Christian thought, usually key words will crop up, like God, or creation, or humanity, or Christ. And each of these words pertains to a set of doctrines that are really worth examining. And that's what systematic theology concerns itself with doing, making so all these themes come together to make sense. Now, I had intended for this video to go on for much longer, but I'm running off of like 5 hours of sleep, and I've got work in an hour, so you'll forgive me if I cut it off here. Next time, we will discuss the differences between the Platonic and the Christian mind and how they metaphysically differ from one another. Until then, as always, I hope that you've learned something. I hope that you've enjoyed learning something. And yeah, I'll see you guys later. This is the Idiot, signing out.